Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at another overclock, specifically the Deep Core PGL's Hyper-Propellant Overclock. This overclock makes your projectile travel at extreme speeds at the sacrifice of having less ammo and a smaller blast radius, effectively turning into a railgun instead of a grenade launcher. However, as well as looking at the gameplay applications of the overclock, we're also going to compare it to some real-life weapons and sciences to see if it actually makes sense. Basically, I spent the last 2 hours doing math, and hopefully I did it right. But without further ado, let's head over to the weapons terminal and see what we're working with. So, taking a look at our hyper-propellant overclock, we can see it does what we expect. High damage to a single target, however, less AoE and less ammo, specifically 2 less ammo. These are the upgrades I use with this weapon. However, it's important to note that before we get started, there is an increased speed mod that you can use, so that would affect our calculations. However, as I don't usually use that mod, I'm not going to be using it for the math today. However, just keep in mind that all the numbers would be about 30% higher plus some change. My decision to stick with my normal spec is just that. This is the spec I use day to day, so that's the numbers I want to get. So, we're testing a high damage single target weapon. What's the obvious choice to test it on, of course? The highest single target health that you encounter regularly. Due to the way this weapon behaves, it does more damage to crit spots as it's considered a bullet instead of an explosive. Normally, the Dreadnought Flesh resists explosive damage. However, whenever we hit it directly, it does kinetic damage instead of explosive, dealing the full damage that we would expect. It also does decent damage frontally, but obviously not nearly as well as hitting a weak spot. So, having seen this, we're going to now move on to the actual projectile speed and velocity calculations, which is going to be a little interesting considering that if you blinked you would have missed the travel time on those grenades. So, here we are. We've given ourselves a 100 meter standoff and we're going to fire our grenade from one end of the room to the other. Due to the curvature of the wall we're hitting and where we're standing, as well as the drop and flight, I'm going to give us a 5% margin of error for our calculations. However, this is pretty accurately 100 meters. So I'm not going to make you sit through the painstaking process of counting frames. I assure you it is 45 frames from the first frame it leaves the barrel to the first frame of the explosion on the other side of the room. So, 45 frames to travel 100 meters at 60 frames a second. We can work with this. Alright everyone, go ahead and grab a hot drink and kick up your feet because we might be here for a minute doing, God forbid, math. But, well, one thing real quick. Turn on the math music! So, here we go. So our basic unit of measurement here is 45 frames for 100 meters. But we need to get this in a workable unit of time, so let's go up to 60 frames per second, which is 33.3% repeating, more than 45. So that brings our meters per second up to 133.3 repeating meters per second. So, let's get this into a more workable unit of measurement now, kilometers. So if we need 0.75 seconds, 45 frames, to go 100 meters, then we'll just multiply both numbers by 10. 100 meters times 10 is 1 kilometer, and 0.75 seconds times 10 is 7.5 seconds. So all we have to do now is divide the amount of seconds in an hour by the amount of time it takes us to go 1 kilometer, which is 7.5 seconds. So 3,600 divided by 7.5 is 480 kilometers per hour. Now we're really starting to get into the good stuff. So where am I going with this? Basically what I wanted to find when I started this calculation was the actual hurt behind each one of these grenades. However, unfortunately at this point in our calculations we can't go by pure fact that we can gather from the game and we have to start making some assumptions. However, for the sake of fun, we're going to keep going. So the piece of information we're going to need to figure out how much hurt is behind each grenade is the velocity, which we have, as well as the mass of the projectile, which we're going to have to make some assumptions on. But by doing some light reading online that probably got me on some government watch lists, we can speculate a mass for our projectile. So, assuming that this diagram that I found of a 40mm high explosive cartridge is correct, we can assume that our projectile weighs about half a pound. Now, I know this counts the casing and the propellant as well, but for the sake of video game logic, we're just going to assume it shoots the whole thing through magic. And since we're calculating in metric, we'll go ahead and convert this over to grams with about 226. But before we get our final number, I wanted to compare it to a real-life grenade launcher. The M203 grenade launcher fires at about 250 feet per second, meanwhile ours fires about 437 feet per second. This is more than a 57% increase. At long last, it's been confirmed, dwarf game better than real life. Alright, enough comparisons. So, if we want to get our final calculations, all we have to do is plug in our mass of 226 grams and our velocity of 133 meters per second, and at long last, we have 2,014 joules of energy. Now, if you're like me and you don't have a good real-life reference on how much energy 1 joule is, I decided to look up the interaction between units of joules and the human body. And sure enough, it's a lot. To simplify the horrible wording of this entry, a 20% chance of lethality with a head blow of 80 joules, and a 90% chance of lethality with a head blow of 150 joules. So, barring any sort of common sense, I'm going to just directly say that this is a crit spot on a glyphid. So, following this line of logic, we can assume that glyphids are quite a bit tougher than humans, which isn't surprising considering they're armored space bugs that live in a vacuum on another planet that's constantly erupting and poisonous and full of ice. So, the fact that the 2,000 joules takes 1/3 of the health off of a dreadnought, we can assume that a dreadnought's about 45 times stronger than a normal human, which also makes sense by this logic. So at this point in this project, I'm not really sure what I'm still trying to learn. We learned that a hyperpropellant projectile without the velocity upgrade is about 2,000 joules, so we'll say with the velocity upgrade is about 2,600. And as human beings, this is higher than we can really fathom on a day-to-day basis, as it would blow our head off our shoulders 45 times over. So I'm just gonna say, hyperpropellant is really scary. It's very fast and packs a lot of energy. And you should definitely try not to hit your fellow dwarves with it, even if it is really funny. But that's about all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see some more Deep Rock Galactic content, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And if you have any feedback on my horrible, roughly estimated math, please leave it in the comments below. I definitely messed up at least one of these calculations. Once again, thank you for watching, and have a good day.